Fire devours everything in its path, but it also exposes the truth hiding under the ashes. When the alarm tore through the Ashford estate at 3 o'clock in the morning, it wasn't the smoke that choked the empire, it was betrayal. While the wife of the most feared mafia boss on the West Coast stepped into her car and drove away minutes before the first flame touched the curtains, leaving her children to the fire, an invisible nanny, a nobody with no last name worth keeping, hurled herself into the flames. She didn't do it for money. She didn't do it for the boss. She did it because a mother isn't defined by blood, but by who she's willing to burn for. Tonight, Cale Ashford, the man who controls half of America's underworld, is about to face a truth no amount of power could buy. He's about to learn who actually holds the heart of his empire. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs a good story tonight. Subscribe and hit the bell, because next week we're dropping a tale about a rejected bride and a billionaire who never forgets a debt. Seattle rain in November never really washes anything clean. It only makes everything damp, heavier, like a bruise pressed down into the ground. And on the night of November 14th, the rain dragged smoke with it, forcing it low against the cobblestone courtyard of the Ashford estate, as if the sky and earth were trying to hide what was about to happen. Ray Sullivan sat in the corner of the staff room, where the fluorescent light flickered and the faint smell of industrial detergent hung in the air. She was folding Milo and June's tiny cashmere outfits, clothes meant for 3-year-olds who were mischievous, loud, beautiful, and completely abandoned by the woman who gave birth to them. Ray had no family, no relatives, not a single childhood photograph she'd been able to keep after 21 years spinning through the foster care system in Portland. She graduated in early childhood education with a diploma and a suitcase, then took a nanny job at the Ashford estate through a referral from a small convent. No one interviewed her. No one asked what she liked, what she hated, or what she dreamed about. They only needed someone willing to stay up at night, change diapers, and disappear when guests arrived. Ray did all of that, and she loved those 2 children as if they were the reason she'd been born. Milo always called her name before he fell asleep. June would only eat if Ray sat beside her, her tiny hand gripping Ray's pinky, as if she was afraid Ray would vanish. The true master of this estate, Cale Ashford, was in Chicago tonight. 6 hours ago, he sat at the head of a long oak table in a sealed room on the top floor of the Peninsula Hotel, facing 4 Midwestern family bosses. His voice was cold and slow as he laid down the terms. The kind of voice the men across from him understood wasn't an offer, but an ultimatum. No one dared to interrupt Cale Ashford. No one dared to hold his gaze for more than 3 seconds. And Genevieve, the woman the press called the Ashford Queen, was absent from the nursery tonight too. Like every night, Jenny had never stepped into the nursery after 9 o'clock at night. She was in the west wing of the estate, where she had her own bedroom, a closet bigger than the first apartment Ray had ever lived in, and a perfume collection that cost more than Ray's entire yearly pay put together. Jenny only appeared beside the children when guests came over, or when a magazine photographer scheduled a family shoot. She'd pick Milo up, smile perfectly, then hand him back to Ray the moment the flash stopped. Ray smelled it before her ears heard anything at all. Not the scent of the fireplace, not the damp pine of the Washington woods surrounding the estate, but the smell of burning wires, smoking plaster, sulfur sharp enough to tear at her nose, the nursery. Those 2 words lit up in Ray's mind, and she didn't think anything else. She didn't put on shoes. She ran barefoot across the cobblestones, rain lashing her face, sharp stones cutting into the soles of her feet. When she turned the corner of the corridor connecting the staff building to the main house, the east wing of the estate was already in flames. Glass blasted outward like razor diamonds. Heat slammed into her face as hard as a slap. Fire had already licked up the wall to the 2nd floor, where the nursery was. Ray screamed, calling for security. They were running everywhere, shouting into radios, but it was absolute chaos. The automatic sprinkler system didn't spray. Not a single drop of water. The system had been sabotaged from the inside, even though it had been serviced last week. Then Ray saw it. The garage door beyond the fire was open. A matte black Audi RS7, Jenny's personal car, shot out of the driveway with tires shrieking on the wet pavement. In the headlights, Ray saw Jenny in the driver's seat clearly. She didn't look back toward the house that was burning. She was checking the rearview mirror, adjusting her sunglasses. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the back seat was empty. No child seats. No Milo, no June. Jenny was leaving. Alone. Rage flared in Ray's chest, hot and white, swallowing fear whole. She left them behind. Ray didn't wait for anyone. She grabbed a thick wool blanket from the porch chair, plunged it into the decorative fountain in the middle of the courtyard until it was heavy with water, then threw it over her head and shoulders. She kicked the side door open and ran straight into the sea of fire. The heat hit her like an invisible wall. Black smoke, thick and greasy like oil, rolled from the ceiling down to the floor, and Ray understood at once that if she stayed upright, she'd be dead within a minute. She dropped to her knees, then flattened herself, crawling on her belly across the marble floor that burned hot under her ribs. The wet blanket draped over her back and head like the only fragile armor between her and hell. The main staircase had collapsed. 100-year-old oak groaned, and then split in two right in front of her eyes, crashing down to the first floor inside a pillar of fire. But the iron service stairs, the staff passage Ray used every day to carry linens up to the second floor, were still standing. The iron was scorching, but it hadn't given way. Ray gripped the railing and climbed. With every step, her palms felt the searing hiss, skin meeting heated metal, then the pain, then the smell. She clenched her teeth and kept climbing. Her hands blistered after the third step. After the seventh, she couldn't feel her fingers anymore, only a dull, wet ache stretching from her wrist to her fingertips. She didn't stop. The second floor was a tunnel of smoke. Ray crawled along the hallway, her shoulder scraping the baseboard, counting each door by memory because she could barely see anything. The first door was the laundry room. The second was Jenny's reading room, the one no one had ever seen her actually read in. The third, the nursery. Ray recognized it by the grain of the wood beneath her hand, the small raised crowns she'd traced hundreds of times whenever she brought the children their night milk. But the paint was bubbling under her fingers, peeling away in strips like dead skin. She grabbed the doorknob and yanked. Nothing. She yanked again, harder, using both hands even though it hurt so much she wanted to scream. The door wouldn't open. Ray didn't pause to ask herself why. She backed up 2 steps, took a shallow breath through the wet blanket, then slammed her shoulder into the door. The first time, the wood shuddered. The second time, the frame cracked. The third time, she heard it break, and her whole body spilled into the room, her knees smashing the floor as the wet blanket slid off her shoulders. The nursery hadn't been completely swallowed by fire yet, but the smoke was deadly. It seeped into every corner, coating the white crib, the bookshelf packed with stuffed animals, the star-shaped nightlight Milo demanded every night, and beneath the crib, 2 small shapes curled into each other. Ray. Milo's voice was tiny, hoarse, trembling like a thread about to snap. June couldn't speak. She only clung to her brother, her face buried against Milo's chest, her whole body shaking. Ray crawled to them. She wanted to say, "I'm here," but her throat seized from the soot, so only a torn sound came out, enough for Milo to recognize, enough for him to reach his little arms toward her. Ray wrapped the wet blanket around both children, pulling them against her chest, sealing them tight like a cocoon. She looked at the window. Second floor, too high to jump with 2 3-year-olds in her arms. She looked back at the broken doorway. Fire had flooded the hallway, cutting off the way back. The bathroom. The half-bath connected to the nursery, tiled in stone and porcelain, materials that didn't burn as quickly as wood. Ray dragged the children inside, kicked the bathroom door shut with her foot, then twisted the shower on full blast. Cold water poured down, soaking her hair, the blanket, their clothes. She set Milo and June into the cast-iron tub, the heavy old kind, poured from a single solid block of iron. Then she climbed in after them, laying herself face down over both children, her back toward the ceiling, her arms wrapped completely around them beneath her. "Don't look," she whispered into their hair that still carried the lavender shampoo scent she'd used to bathe them at 7 o'clock that evening. "Just listen to Ray's heartbeat." "Okay, just listen." An explosion from the bedroom. The ceiling gave way. Heat crashed into the bathroom like a wave, burning everything above them. Ray's back seared. She felt her skin swell, split, and then a pain so deep it reached the bone tore from her shoulders down to her lower back. She ground her teeth until she heard the enamel cry out. She didn't scream. She didn't groan. She didn't let Milo and June hear any sound from her except the frantic pounding of her heart through her chest. The shower was still running, but the heat was winning. Ray felt consciousness slipping, as if someone were slowly turning down the volume of the world. In the darkness spreading behind her eyes, She whispered one last time, not knowing to whom. Maybe to God, maybe to the universe, maybe to Cale Ashford himself, even though he was 1,000 miles away. Take me, but please let him find them. Then the dark swallowed her whole, not from the smoke, but from the pain. And everything sank into silence. Cale Ashford was sitting in the back seat of a Gulfstream G700 when his phone rang. He'd left Chicago less than 40 minutes ago, the cuff of his dress shirt still carrying the scent of cigar smoke from a 6-hour negotiation with the Midwestern families. Barrett Hale, the man Cale trusted more than anyone on this planet, never called after midnight unless someone was dead. Cale picked up. Barrett's voice was usually low and steady as bedrock, but tonight it cracked. "Boss, the estate is on fire. The East Wing. The nursery is in the burn zone. We haven't been able to reach it." Cale didn't say a word. The right hand holding the phone began to tremble, just slightly, but enough for the man across from him, his private attorney, to notice and quietly sink deeper into his seat. The air in the cabin turned to ice. No one dared to breathe too hard. Cale said only 2 words. "Turn around." The pilot banked the jet through the night without asking a single question. During the entire flight back to Seattle, Cale sat motionless, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window, both hands clenched on his knees, his knuckles bleached white. He called Jenny. It rang 4 times, then dropped to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. A 3rd time. Voicemail. He set the phone down and closed his eyes. On the outside, the boss who controlled the entire west coast of America didn't change expression. On the inside, a father was dying by the second. An armored SUV was waiting on the private runway when the jet touched down. Cale stepped out before the stairs were even fully set, jumped onto the wet tarmac, his suit jacket unbuttoned, rain lashing his face, and he didn't even bother to lift a hand. Barrett drove. On the way, he added what he knew. The fire suppression system didn't activate. The security bypass was internal, boss. Someone with administrative access manually overrode the sprinklers and the main gate cameras. Fire crews from 3 counties are on site. The East Wing has almost completely collapsed. We haven't confirmed whether anyone is still inside. Cale didn't answer. When the SUV turned onto the private road leading up to the estate, Cale saw the orange glow reflected on the wet pine branches before he saw the house. Or rather, what was left of it. The Ashford mansion, the place his father built, the place he grew up, the place his children were born, was now a stone skeleton lit red from within. Fire engines from 3 counties lined the front courtyard, hoses blasting white foam, but the fire still licked from the inside like an animal that refused to die. Rain struck the hot stone and turned to steam with constant hissing sounds, like whispers. Cale stepped out of the SUV, and his voice carried across the yard with a weight that made every firefighter turn at once. "Where are my children?" It wasn't a question. It was an order. The chaos paused for a heartbeat, and from the ambulance near the gate, someone ran toward him. Genny. She was wrapped in a gold emergency blanket, hair tangled, mascara smeared into 2 black tracks down her cheekbones, her mouth twisted. She slammed into Cale's chest, both hands clutching his lapels, sobbing. "Cale, oh God, Cale." I tried. I ran up the stairs, but the fire was too big. The stairs collapsed right in front of me. I couldn't get into the nursery. I almost died. Cale held her by the shoulders, at arm's length, and looked into her eyes. Jenny's eyes were red, wet, panicked. Everything was right. The tears were right. The shaking voice was right. A flawless performance. But something was wrong. Cale couldn't name it yet, but the instincts of a man who'd faced professional liars for 20 years were growling in his skull. Something didn't fit. He filed it into a dark corner of his mind, the place where he kept every unpaid debt, and let his hands drop from her shoulders. "Where are the children, Genevieve?" His voice was flat as a frozen lake. Jenny crumpled, both knees hitting the wet ground, her hands covering her face. "I don't know. It happened too fast. I couldn't." She sobbed, shoulders shaking, choking between the rain. "I'm their mother. I would never abandon my own children." Cale's world turned gray. Sound vanished. Rain vanished. All he could hear was his own heart, slow and heavy, like a countdown. His knees hit the ground. The boss of the entire West Coast, the man no one had ever seen bow his head, knelt on the cobblestones in front of the ashes of his own empire and released a sound from the bottom of his chest. Not a scream, not a cry, but the roar of a father whose reason for living had just been cut away. Then a shout split the rain. From the second-floor rubble, a large firefighter named Henderson was waving wildly from the portion of balcony that hadn't collapsed. "Someone's in the bathtub. There's a heartbeat. 2 heartbeats. No, 3 heartbeats." Kale stood and ran. He didn't wait for a ladder. He grabbed the firefighter's steel support frame and climbed to the second floor with both hands, ignoring the heat still radiating from the stone, ignoring the firefighters yelling at him to stop. He passed Henderson, pushed through the charred doorway, and stepped into the bathroom, a cast-iron tub black with soot. Inside it, a heap of wool blankets soaked through, scorched, stuck together. Kale tore the blanket back with his bare hands and saw them. Milo, June. Eyes closed, faces smeared with soot, but their chests rose and fell. Alive. His children were alive. And beneath them, face down, her back exposed to the collapsed ceiling, was a young woman. Kale didn't know her name. He didn't even recognize her face, because it was pressed into the children's chests. But he saw her back. Burned black, skin split, blistered, red and black braided together from her shoulders to her lower back. And her arms, burned so badly the color of her skin was no longer recognizable, were still locked around the 2 children. Even unconscious, her body refused to let go. Kale understood. He didn't need anyone to explain. He didn't need to know her name, where she came from, or what claim she had to the children. He only needed to see those arms. He turned back out, his voice carrying through the ruins with an authority that couldn't be challenged. Save her. Every doctor, every resource, whatever it takes. She is not allowed to die. 3 days. Ray Sullivan lay in darkness for 3 days, drifting along the thin border between living and dying, a place with no dreams, no memories, only an absolute blackness and, now and then, very far away, the steady beep of a heart monitor tugging her closer to the surface before letting her sink again. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw wasn't the familiar ceiling of the staff room with the mold stain in the upper right corner. This was a different room. A high ceiling, flawless white paint, gentle lighting, heavy silk curtains sealing off the windows, a faint scent of antiseptic mixed with fresh flowers. The bed beneath her was so soft she thought she was lying on a cloud. And then the pain crashed in, spreading from her back down to her hips, hot and throbbing. And she remembered everything. Fire, smoke, the iron staircase, the door that wouldn't open, the bathtub. She tried to sit up, and a firm hand, gentle but unyielding, held her shoulder down. "Don't move." A woman's voice, low, with a slight German accent, each word precise as a scalpel. Ray turned her head. A woman of about 55, short platinum hair, gray eyes behind rimless glasses, wearing a white coat, stood beside the bed with a chart in her hand. "I'm Dr. Ingrid Falk, the Ashford family's private physician. You were unconscious for 3 days. You have extensive 2nd and 3rd degree burns stretching across your back, while both your arms suffered severe blistering. You will have permanent scarring." Ray didn't hear anything after the words 3 days. Her mouth was bitter dry, her tongue stuck to the roof of her throat, but she forced out the only sentence, the only one that mattered. "The children. Milo and June." Dr. Falk paused. For the first time, the severity on her face softened, just a little, like a small crack in a concrete wall. "Alive. Both of them are alive. Minor burns on their hands and feet, some smoke inhalation, but nothing dangerous." She looked Ray straight in the eyes. "Because of you." Ray couldn't speak. Tears ran down her face, not from pain, not from fear, but from something bigger than all of it. Something she didn't have a name for, only that it was warm and heavy, and it made her chest feel like it might split open. She cried in silence, her face turned toward the pillow, her shoulders shaking without a sound. Dr. Falk let her cry. She didn't comfort her, didn't offer hollow reassurance. She only stood there, writing and waiting. When Ray finally calmed, Falk began to examine the wounds. She removed the bandages from Ray's back, careful but professional, and Ray bit her lip so she wouldn't groan when the air touched raw skin. Falk checked each area, took notes, then stopped. Longer than usual. Ray felt that silence and knew it meant something. "Something wrong, doctor?" Falk frowned, her finger tapping lightly on the chart. The opposite. Your burns are healing, faster than any case I've treated in 30 years of practice. Your tissue is regenerating at a rate I can't explain with ordinary medicine. She looked at Ray with an expression that was both curious and unsettled. Your constitution is highly unusual, Miss Sullivan. Highly unusual. Then she closed the chart and walked out without another word, leaving that sentence hanging in the room like a question with no answer. Ray barely had time to think about it when the door opened again. And this time, the man who stepped in made her forget how to breathe. Cale Ashford. She had worked in his estate for nearly 2 years, but she'd never been close enough to him to be within 10 steps. She'd only seen him through window glass, through a cracked doorway, in the moments he passed the nursery without stopping long enough for her to bow her head. He was taller than she expected, and more exhausted than she'd ever imagined. Dark circles under his eyes, hollowed cheekbones, 3 days of stubble shadowing his square jaw. His shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up, no suit jacket, no watch. He didn't look like the kingpin she'd seen in magazine photos. He looked like a father who hadn't slept in 3 nights. Cale pulled a chair from the corner of the room to the side of the bed, sat down, and looked at her. Silence. A long time. His eyes were gray as steel, but inside them something was burning. Not anger, not authority, but something Ray never expected to see in this man. Gratitude. Finally he spoke. Only one word. Why? Ray looked at him. She didn't understand the question. Or rather, she didn't understand why it was a question. For her, there had been no other choice. I don't understand what you mean. Cale leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You had no obligation to do that. You're a nanny, not their mother, not their bodyguard, not anyone in this family at all. You could have run outside and lived. Why did you go in? Ray was quiet for a moment. Then she said, her voice hoarse and soft, unadorned, not trying to impress, only the truth. Milo says my name every night before he falls asleep. June holds my hand every time she eats. They are the first thing I think of when I open my eyes every morning, and the last thing before I close them every night. That isn't obligation, Mr. Ashford. That is love. The room was so still, Ray could hear the rain falling outside the window. Cale didn't say anything. He only looked at her, and in that moment, something changed in his eyes. Very small, like the click of a lock opening and no one seeing the key. He stood. Starting today, you won't be in the staff quarters anymore. You'll have your own room next to the nursery. Private security. 24/7 access to Milo and June. Ray opened her mouth to say something. Maybe to refuse. Maybe to thank him. But Cale had already turned and walked to the door. Before it closed, he stopped, didn't look back, and added one more sentence. His voice so low it was almost a whisper. I owe you a debt I don't know how to repay. But I'll find a way. The door shut. Ray lay there alone in a room too beautiful for anything she'd ever had in her life. Her tears not yet dry on the pillow, and for the first time in 27 years, she didn't feel invisible. 2 weeks passed, and Ray Sullivan learned how to live again in a completely different world. Her new room was beside the nursery, separated by a connecting door she kept open all night. The bed had Egyptian cotton sheets, fabric so cool she didn't dare lie on it the first few nights, because she was afraid of dirtying it. The closet already held a few new outfits, her exact size. No one asked what she liked. They simply appeared, neatly folded on the shelf one morning while she was bathing the children. Ray didn't ask who had arranged any of it. She knew the answer. The wounds on her back still hurt, especially each morning when she lifted her arms to reach the cereal box on the kitchen shelf for Milo. But she didn't let the children see her wince. She pressed the pain down inside the way she'd pressed everything down for 27 years, then knelt, smiled, and asked Milo if he wanted chocolate flavor or honey flavor. The new life had a strange rhythm. Ray woke at 6 o'clock, prepared breakfast with Gus Peralta in the enormous kitchen, then woke the children, bathed them, dressed them, read books, played in the garden when it wasn't raining, and rocked them to sleep at 7 o'clock in the evening. Just like before the fire, but with one difference. Cale was home more now. He came back earlier. He told Barrett he needed to check the progress of rebuilding the East Wing. But every night he stopped in the nursery doorway, stood there for 3 or 4 minutes, and watched Ray sitting on the rug, reading to Milo and June. He didn't step in. He only stood there, hands in his pockets, back against the frame, and looked on. Ray knew he was there. She always knew, but she didn't turn around. Then one afternoon, as Ray was cutting apples into star shapes for June's snack, Milo ran into the kitchen, wrapped his arms around Ray's leg, tipped his face up, eyes wide, and said, "Mama Ray, I want more stars. Mama Ray." Ray froze, the apple knife suspended in midair. She had never heard the word Mama used for her. 27 years. No one had called her by any name that meant belonging. She was Ray. She was Miss Sullivan. She was Hey Kid in foster homes. She was the nanny at the estate. But never Mama. She turned her face toward the sink, pretending to wash her hands, but really to let the tears fall where Milo wouldn't see them. Cale saw. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and he saw everything. Ray's shoulders shaking, the way she bowed her head, the way she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and turned back with a smile, as if nothing had happened. He didn't say anything. He only set the coffee down on the counter and walked away. But that night, when the entire estate was asleep, Ray couldn't sleep. The burns hurt more at night, when there was nothing to distract her. So she went out to the second-floor balcony, where she could see the black pine forest and, far away, the yellow lights of Seattle on the horizon. Cale was there too. He sat on an iron chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, eyes on the dark. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Can't sleep." Not a question. "The wounds hurt at night," Ray answered, standing a few steps away, not sure if she should sit. "Sit." She sat, and for the first time since she'd stepped into the Ashford estate, they talked. Not as employer and employee, not as a kingpin and a nanny, just two human beings sitting beside each other in the night. Cale asked where she'd grown up. Ray told him. Portland. The foster care system. 7 families in 17 years. Not one family kept her long enough for her to remember the color of the paint in her bedroom. She was used to packing her things into black plastic bags and moving in the middle of the night. She was used to no one remembering her name. "I got used to being invisible," Ray said, her voice light, without bitterness, only the truth spoken by someone who'd accepted it a long time ago. Cale didn't look at her. He stared out at the pine forest, the whiskey glass unmoving in his hand. Then he said, his voice low and slow, "You aren't invisible. Not to me. Not after that night." They didn't look at each other. They didn't touch. Nothing happened that a security camera could record. But in that silence, between the scent of wet pine and the small rain tapping the overhang, both of them felt an invisible thread tie itself, fragile but real. Ray returned to her room 15 minutes later. She walked through the dark hall of the West Wing, where Jenny still was, and her steps slowed when her ears caught a sound, a whisper. Behind the half-open door of the reading room, Jenny was on the phone. Her voice was so low it was almost inaudible, but Ray caught one phrase, "Right on schedule." Then Jenny looked up. The two women's eyes met in the dark. Jenny ended the call immediately, slipped the phone into her robe pocket, and smiled. A wide, white, perfect smile and completely empty. Just calling a friend. "It's late, and you're still not asleep." Ray nodded, said goodnight, and kept walking. But her stomach tightened. Not from fear, from instinct. The instinct of a child who'd grown up in 7 strange houses and learned to read danger before she learned to read words, screaming inside her that something wasn't right. The next morning, Ray went into the kitchen earlier than usual and found Gus Peralta grinding coffee, softly singing a bolero in Spanish. Gus, 50 years old, Puerto Rican, a former Navy petty officer before becoming the head chef for the Ashford family, was the only person in the estate who called Ray Kid without making her feel insulted. He watched her come in, frowned at the careful way she rotated her shoulders, then set a cup down. "Kid, come here. I'm going to show you something." He stood behind her, gently took her wrist, and guided her. "If someone grabs you from behind, don't try to twist free, don't punch, your hands aren't strong enough. Just stomp hard on the top of their foot. As hard as you can. The bones in the top of the foot are thin. They'll break. They'll let go in a fraction of a second, and a fraction of a second is enough to run." Ray looked at him. "Why are you teaching me this?" Gus shrugged. "Because you live in Cale Ashford's house, and in this world, people who don't know how to defend themselves don't live long." Then he poured her a cup of coffee, added 2 spoonfuls of sugar because he knew she liked it sweet, and winked. "But you're stronger than you think, kid." Ray smiled, for the first time since the night of November 14th. A small smile, a little crooked because her lips were still dry and cracked, but real. Barrett Hale never knocked on Cale's office door unless something had happened that was worth killing for. That morning, he knocked 3 times, walked in, set a laptop, a burner phone sealed inside a locked zip bag, and a USB drive on Cale's walnut desk, then stood at attention and waited. Cale looked at the items on the desk, then at Barrett. Barrett's face was the face of a former Marine who'd seen the worst things people could do to one another, and tonight it carried an expression Cale had never seen on him. Disgust. Talk. Barrett opened the laptop. First came dashcam footage from the patrol vehicle, stationed outside the estate gate, a camera that ran independently from the main security system, so it hadn't been erased with the rest. The video showed it clearly. Genevieve Ashford's black Audi RS7 left the estate gate at 2:56 in the morning, 4 minutes before the first flames rose in the east wing, 4 minutes before the fire alarm screamed, 4 minutes before anyone inside the estate knew anything was wrong. Cale said nothing. His eyes stayed locked on the screen. Barrett continued. This burner phone was found in a Louboutin shoebox in Mrs. Ashford's dressing room, hidden under 2 layers of tissue paper. Inside, there were a total of 37 calls and 42 text messages over the past 3 months, all incoming and outgoing to a single number. Barrett stopped, swallowed, then said the name. Paxton Creed. The air in the room didn't change. There was no roar, no slammed fist, no explosion of rage. And that was the most terrifying part. Cale Ashford sat perfectly still, spine straight, both hands flat on the desk, and silent. The kind of silence Barrett knew well. The ticking of a bomb. Barrett plugged in the USB drive. This is an audio recording extracted from the burner phone, a call from 5 weeks ago, 23 days before the night of the fire. He hit play. The first voice was Jenny, soft and seductive, the voice she used when she wanted something. The second voice belonged to a man, low, slow, calm to the point of sounding almost bored, but every word was sharp as a razor. It was the first time Cale heard Paxton Creed's voice speaking about his children. Paxton's voice in the recording wasn't hurried at all. He talked about clearing out the airs in the tone of a man discussing cleaning out a storage room, emotionless, without emphasis, just another item on a work list. He said that if the children were gone, Ashford would collapse from the inside. No need to strike, no need for war. Just wait for a father with no reason left to live to destroy himself. And Jenny's voice answered him, not with protest, not with hesitation, but with a number, 10 million. Transfer it to the account in Zurich before I act. Cale cut the audio off. The room went so quiet Barrett could hear the wall clock. Cale looked at Barrett. The nursery door. Barrett nodded, understanding what his boss was asking. Forensics confirmed it. The nursery latch had been locked from the outside with a manual bolt, not jammed by heat, not warped by the fire. Someone had deliberately locked that door before the flames started, to make sure the children couldn't get out. Cale stood up. Slowly, like an animal restraining the instinct to tear its prey apart, he fastened his cufflinks again, smoothed the lapel of his suit jacket, and said in a flat voice, "Bring her in." 10 minutes later, Genevieve Ashford walked into her husband's office wearing the smile she'd sharpened over 10 years of political marriage, the smile of a woman who always knew she was the most beautiful person in the room and used it as a weapon, but that smile died the moment she saw the burner phone on the desk. Cale didn't speak, he only looked at her, then at the phone, then back at her. Jenny stood there, and within 3 seconds, 10 years of flawless performance collapsed like the East Wing on the night of November 14th. Her face went bloodless. Her hands shook. "Cale, I can explain." Cale lifted one hand, just a single finger, and Jenny stopped talking as if someone had cut her vocal cords. He hit play on the recording. Jenny's voice filled the room, clear, undeniable, talking about $10 million and a Zurich account. When the recording ended, Jenny cried. She dropped to her knees, gripping the edge of the desk, tears streaming, mascara smeared, the entire image of the Ashford Queen shattering on the hardwood floor. She begged, she explained. She blamed Paxton for forcing her, blamed a loveless marriage, blamed loneliness, blamed everything except herself. Cale waited until she finished. Then he spoke, not louder than a whisper, but each word heavy as lead. "You have 12 hours to leave my territory. Your assets, your name, your parental rights. Everything is revoked from this moment forward. I don't kill women, Genevieve. That's my rule." But if after 12 hours I still see your face anywhere on the west coast of the United States, that rule will have its first exception. Genny was escorted out of the office by 2 of Barrett's men. She walked between 2 walls of bodies, hair undone, eyes swollen, her Louboutin heels clicking on the stone floor like a countdown. When she passed the nursery, she saw Ray standing in the hallway, June on her hip, Milo hiding behind Ray's leg. Genny stopped. Her expression warped, from fear to hatred in a fraction of a second. She lunged toward Ray, her voice hissing through her teeth. You! Who do you think you are? You're just a servant. You're just an orphan nobody wanted. You will never replace me. Never. Ray didn't move. She didn't step back. She didn't answer. She only held June a little tighter and placed her hand on Milo's head. Gentle, protective, calm. Kale's voice cut down the hallway. Only 2 words, but they sliced through every sound like a gunshot. Enough. Jenny looked at Kale, then at Ray, then at the 2 children clinging to their nanny without looking at their biological mother even once. She understood, and she walked away. The estate doors closed behind Genevieve Ashford at 11 o'clock that night. She vanished into the Seattle darkness with a single suitcase the security team allowed her to carry. No jewelry, no credit cards, no identity. Ray stood in the hallway, June asleep on her shoulder now. Milo wrapped around her leg, and she stared at the closed door with a feeling she couldn't describe. Not victory, not pity, only the cold emptiness betrayal leaves behind after it's gone. Kale stood at the end of the hall, looking at her. He didn't say anything. He only walked over, set his hand on her shoulder, light, warm, brief, then stepped past and returned to his office. But for 1 second, when his hand touched her shoulder, Ray felt its weight. Not physical weight, the weight of a promise that hadn't been spoken out loud. The next morning, Milo stood in the middle of the nursery, looking around, then up at Ray with the wide, questioning eyes of a 3-year-old who didn't yet understand the cruel laws by which the adult world operates. Where did Mama go? June didn't ask. June sat in the corner of the room, holding Mr. Buttons, the teddy bear with one worn ear that she carried everywhere, and stared into space with eyes older than her years. 3 years old and already knowing how to be silent when everything collapses. Ray knelt down, both knees touching the floor, her eyes level with Milo's. She didn't lie. She never lied to the children. Mama had to go far away. Ray doesn't know for how long, but Ray is here. Ray is always here, okay? Milo looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then his tiny arms wrapped around her neck, hugging tight, his face buried in her shoulder. June quietly crawled over, still clutching Mr. Buttons in one hand, her other hand gripping Ray's shirt. Ray held both of them, closed her eyes, and held on. Outside the door, Kale stood still, his back against the wall, eyes lowered to the floor. He heard every word. He turned away and walked down the hallway, his steps heavier than usual, and Barrett at the far end of the corridor was wise enough not to say a thing. A month passed. The Ashford estate changed not because of architecture, the East Wing was still being rebuilt, but because of the rhythm inside it. Ray Sullivan was now the official secondary guardian of Milo and June Ashford. The legal papers drafted by Kale's attorney, signed with a hand still wrapped in medical gauze, and for the first time in her life, her name appeared on a document that meant something. She was no longer a ghost in the staff quarters. She was the one the children ran to when thunder cracked, the one Milo tugged by the hand to show a new drawing, the one June handed Mr. Buttons to for safekeeping every time she needed the bathroom because she trusted no one else. One afternoon, Ray was in her private bathroom, the door slightly open because she didn't think anyone would be on that floor at that hour. She stood with her back to the mirror, trying to remove the medical bandages to replace them. It was something she did herself every day because she didn't want anyone to see. Not because it hurt, but because she was ashamed. Even though she knew that was irrational, she still felt the scars on her back were something to hide, the way she'd hidden every wound for 27 years. As the bandage peeled away, Ray froze. Her reflection in the mirror caught a movement behind her. Kale. She gasped, spinning around and pulling her shirt down with trembling hands. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you." Kale didn't look away. He didn't step forward either. He stood there, looking at her, and spoke in a tone she'd never heard him use with anyone. "Don't hide it." Ray stopped pulling at her shirt. "That's proof my children are alive. Never hide it." Then he set the folder down on the shelf by the door, stepped in one pace, just one, and his voice lowered almost to a whisper. I control an empire, Ray. I sit at the head of tables with professional killers, and no one dares look me in the eye. But that night I was in Chicago, drinking in a hotel suite, while my children were burning. He paused. The muscles in his jaw tightened, then released. You did what I couldn't. You were there when I wasn't. The bathroom was small. The distance between them no more than an arm's length. Ray looked into Cale's eyes, and for the first time she didn't see the kingpin. Didn't see control. Didn't see power. She saw a man carrying a wound no amount of money could heal. The wound of guilt, of not being there at the right moment, of almost losing everything while busy protecting an empire built to shield the very people he nearly lost. Her heart beat faster. His did too. She knew because she saw the pulse at his throat. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Cale stepped back. One step, then another. He turned and left, the bathroom door closing softly. And Ray stood alone with her heart pounding against her ribs as if it wanted out. That night, Barrett knocked on Cale's office door with new intelligence. Paxton Creed was gathering forces. He'd formed an alliance with a Southern family, bought insiders, and according to reliable sources, the next plan wasn't to attack Cale directly, but to kidnap the Ashford children as leverage. Cale listened, then stood and walked to the window overlooking the dark pine forest. Triple the security. Install an armored safe room in the basement of the secondary estate. Steel door, thermal cameras, biometric locks. If anything happens, priority 1 is the children. Priority 2 is Ray. I'm last. Barrett nodded and left. But he didn't go straight to his own quarters. He went to Ray's room, opened the door while she was in the nursery putting the children to sleep, and placed something beneath her pillow. When Ray returned to her room that night, she lifted the pillow to retrieve the hair clip she always kept there, and her hand touched cold metal. A small handgun, compact, light, fitting perfectly into her palm, already loaded. No letter, no note. Ray stared at it for several seconds, then looked out into the hallway through the crack in the door. Barrett stood at the far end, back against the wall, arms folded across his chest. He looked at her, nodded once, just once, then walked away, his broad back disappearing around the corner. Ray looked down at the gun again. She'd never held one in her life, but she slid it back beneath the pillow, lay down, and for the first time, she slept with the knowledge that someone in this house believed she was worth protecting, and worth protecting herself. The intel arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, from a source Barrett called 90% reliable. Paxton Creed had been spotted at an abandoned industrial warehouse on the southern outskirts of Seattle, near the old Port District, where he was meeting a Mexican weapons supplier. If it was true, this was the only chance to cut off the snake's head before it could strike again. Cale sat in his office, listened to Barrett's briefing, and made the decision in less than 10 seconds. Tonight, the basement garage of the estate became a staging room at 9 o'clock at night. Cale's team weren't the black suit bodyguards who stood outside restaurant doors. They were 12 men whose faces even the underworld rarely recognized, known only by nicknames. They moved through the garage like a special operations unit, not speaking, not looking at one another, each man checking his own weapon in absolute silence. The only sounds were the soft slide of metal as rounds were fed into a magazine and the click of a safety being released. Barrett led. His right shoulder was still bandaged from the night of the fire. His arm usually hung in a sling when he slept, but the sling was gone now, and he held his gun with both hands, as if the injury didn't exist. No one asked if he was okay. In this world, that question was an insult. Cale wore a black shirt, no jacket, no watch, nothing that could reflect light or snag. He checked his personal sidearm, tucked it into an inside holster, then left the garage and climbed the stairs toward the nursery. Ray was sitting on the nursery floor, Milo asleep on her lap. June curled beside her, hugging Mr. Buttons, eyes half closed. Ray looked up when Cale appeared in the doorway. She saw the black clothes. She saw his eyes. She understood immediately without anyone saying a word. Kyle knelt beside her, voice low so he wouldn't wake the children. The safe room code is the children's birthday, 1003. After you enter it, press the pound sign. The door will open in 2 seconds and lock automatically after 5 seconds. Inside there's water, food, a radio, and enough oxygen for 3 days. If anything feels off, any sound you don't recognize, don't wait, don't check. Pick up the children and run straight to the basement. Ray nodded. Her hand rested on Milo's back, gently patting with his breathing. but her eyes stayed on KL. He looked at her for a long time, longer than a simple set of instructions required. Long enough for Ray to see something in his eyes he never let anyone witness. Something behind the steel, behind the kingpin, behind every wall he'd built for 36 years. Fear. Not fear of Paxton. Fear of not making it back. "I'll come back," he said, voice firm. But Ray heard it. She heard the question hidden inside the statement. He stood, looked at Milo and June one more time, then turned and walked away. Ray heard his footsteps fading down the hallway, the rumble of SUVs starting in the garage, tires crunching on gravel, and then silence. The estate felt emptier than it ever had. 4 guards stayed behind. Ray carried the children to bed, pulled blankets up, kissed each forehead, then sat in the chair by the window, staring into the dark, and waited. In southern Seattle, Cale's convoy stopped 200 meters from the warehouse. The formation spread out. Barrett led the forward group in from the east. Cale led the main group through the front entrance. They breached fast, precise, without a single shot. But when Cale kicked the warehouse's iron door open and stepped inside, what he found wasn't Paxton Creed. The warehouse was empty, completely empty, except for an iron table in the center with a Bluetooth speaker on it, already playing. Paxton Creed's voice came through the speaker, calm, slow, almost cheerful. "Hello, Ashford. If you're hearing this message, it means you're standing very far from home, and I'm very close." 3 low-level gunmen sprang from behind shipping containers and fired wildly. Obvious cannon fodder, not fighters, bait meant to buy time. Cale's men dropped them in seconds. But Cale didn't hear the gunfire. He only heard Paxton's voice inside his skull. "Very close. Barrett." Cale spun back, eyes bloodshot. "Call the estate, right now." Barrett pulled out his phone, called again, a 3rd time, no answer. The security line was dead. Cale ran for the vehicles. At that same moment, inside the Ashford estate, the lights went out. Not dimming the way they did when a breaker tripped. They cut off. All of it. Power, cameras, the security system, hallway lights, nursery lights. Everything drowned in darkness in a single breath. June screamed. Milo called Ray in the black. Ray didn't need a second to think. She scooped both children up, one on each hip, and ran barefoot down the stairs toward the basement. She heard sounds behind her, doors being forced, heavy boots on stone, strange radio chatter on a frequency that wasn't Ashford security. She ran faster. Her hands shook, but her mind stayed cold. In the basement, the safe room keypad glowed faintly in the dark. Ray entered the children's birthday. 1, 0, 3, £. The steel door, 20 centimeters thick, opened with a soft hiss. Ray slipped in, pushed the children inside first, then turned and stepped in after them. The door shut behind her with a heavy lock that echoed in the sealed space like a final sentence. Outside, the estate had fallen into enemy hands. Inside, Ray held the children tight in the dark, her back against cold steel, and listened. The safe room was smaller than Ray expected. 4 steel walls, a low ceiling, an emergency bulb casting a murky yellow light, and air that tasted of cold metal. Along the wall, a metal shelf held water jugs, boxes of dry food, a radio, a first aid kit, and an orange flare gun inside a clear plastic case. Ray placed the children in the farthest corner. June cried without sound, tears running but no noise escaping. The kind of crying a child learns when she's learned that silence is safer. Milo held his sister, eyes fixed on Ray, waiting, trusting completely, as if she could fix everything. Ray knelt in front of them. "Listen to Ray, okay? You two stay right here. Hold Mr. Buttons tight. Don't leave this corner, no matter what you hear." "Okay." Milo nodded. June buried her face in Mr. Buttons. Ray stood, turned her back to the children, and swept her eyes across the room, assessing everything. The first aid kit opened easily. Inside were gauze pads, bandages, antiseptic solution in a large plastic bottle, the kind with a red flammable warning label, and the flare gun. Ray took the flare gun out, checked it. A single round was already loaded. She hid it behind her back, tucked it into her waistband, then pulled her shirt down over it. The radio on the shelf crackled to life. Static. Then a man's voice cut through the frequency. Low, cold, unhurried. "Nanny, I know you're in there. I know the kids are with you. This door is thick, but there isn't a door we can't open. Save us both some time. Open up. We only want the children. You can go. Harlan Voss. Ray didn't know his name, but she recognized that voice. The voice of someone who spoke about children's lives the way he talked about deliveries. She didn't answer. She switched the radio off, set it back on the shelf, and moved quietly around the room. She pulled the antiseptic bottle from the kit, unscrewed the cap, set it on the floor about an arm's length from the steel door, then tipped it so the liquid began to spill into a puddle. Then she stood in the center of the room, her back to the children, her face to the door, her right hand clenched around the flare gun behind her. A shriek of metal came from outside. Welding sparks flashed through the seam. They were using an industrial cutter. The steel door trembled, then shook harder, and a bright red cut line began to draw a curve along the hinge. Milo made a small sound behind her. Ray didn't turn around. She couldn't let the children see her face right now, because it wasn't the face of a nanny anymore. The cut finished. The steel door was shoved inward with a crash, slamming onto the floor, and Harlan Voss stepped through with 3 masked men. He was tall, head shaved, eyes cold, a handgun in his hand but not raised, as if this wasn't worth his hurry. He looked at Ray standing in the middle of the room, a thin girl, barefoot, hair wild, in a nightshirt, and he almost smiled. Are you crazy? Move aside. You don't need to die for somebody else's kids. Ray stared straight into his eyes. Her right hand came from behind her back, raised the flare gun to chest level. The barrel aimed not at Harlan, but at the floor, at the spreading pool of antiseptic under his feet. I've walked through fire once. Ray's voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't blink. And you think I'm afraid of burning? Harlan looked down. He saw the puddle. He saw the flammable label. He understood. His face changed. Wait. Ray pulled the trigger. The flare slammed into the floor, and everything ignited at once. The spilled liquid caught instantly. A violent blue-white flame surging up, spreading in a fraction of a second, devouring the space between Ray and Harlan's men. The heat blasted Harlan and his 3 men backward into the hallway, rolling on the floor, screaming. Ray was thrown back into the wall behind her, her back hitting steel. The air punched out of her lungs. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, but she saw the children in the corner, blankets pulled over them, Mr. Buttons on the floor. She crawled to them, dragged Milo with one hand, clutched June with the other, and staggered to her feet. The hallway was full of smoke. Harlan and his crew lay scattered, groaning, the fire still burning but already fading on the concrete. Ray didn't look at them. She carried the children down the hall, down the service stairs, toward the garage. The garage door yawned open, and darkness poured in. Cold, the smell of damp cement and engine oil. Ray made it 3 steps inside before she stopped dead. A voice came from the dark, calm to the point of sounding almost polite. Impressive. The emergency lights flickered back to life, and Ray saw him. Paxton Creed, shaved head, a diagonal scar at his temple, a gray suit, leaning against a black van parked in the middle of the garage, hands in his pockets, as if he were waiting for a bus instead of kidnapping children. He wasn't at the warehouse. He'd never been at the warehouse. He'd been here from the start, waiting for Harlan to clear the way, waiting for Cale to go far, waiting for every piece to move into position. And the children. Ray looked through the van window. Milo and June were no longer in her arms. As Ray crossed the threshold, 2 shadows lunged from the darkness. Before she could scream, strong hands wrenched the children from her grip. She fought, clawing at them, but they threw Milo and June into the van and slammed the door, locking her out. The van doors were locked. Milo slapped the glass from inside, mouth open, but Ray couldn't hear him. Paxton watched Ray, head tilted, as if assessing an unexpected opponent. Ashford chose better than I thought. You took down my elite team with a flare gun and a bottle of alcohol. Then he opened the rear door of the van. His tone didn't change, still calm, still polite, but every word landed like a sentence. Get in, Nanny, or you know the children won't leave this place. Ray looked at the van, at Milo crying, pounding the glass, at June holding Mr. Buttons, eyes wide in the dark. She looked down at her hands. Empty. No weapon. No flare gun. Nothing at all. She let herself go slack. Her shoulders dropped. Her arms fell at her sides. She walked toward the van. Because there are battles you lose, not because you're weak, but because you love too much to gamble. Ray put one foot on the van's step. And in that instant, a sound tore through the garage darkness. Engines. Not one vehicle. Many. roaring from the tunnel that led into the underground garage, echoing off concrete walls, amplified into a continuous thunder under the earth. Headlights swept through the dark, blinding, turning the garage from a black cave into a white stage in a single heartbeat. The first armored SUV surged in, brakes screaming, tires shrieking across the concrete and leaving a long black streak, stopping less than 10 steps from the van. The door flew open before the vehicle fully stopped, and Cale Ashford stepped out, black shirt torn at the shoulder, a diagonal smear of grime across his chest, eyes bloodshot, not from tears, but because he hadn't blinked for 15 miles, driving at a speed that would have killed anyone else. Behind him, Barrett staggered out of the second vehicle, his left arm pressed to his side, clearly bleeding somewhere beneath his suit vest. But he stood straight, gun in his right hand, eyes sweeping the garage like radar. 12 elite men fanned out from the other vehicles, not speaking, moving in formation, blocking every exit, weapons raised, the headlights turning each of them into a black cutout against the glare. Paxton Creed stood beside the van, and for the first time since he'd entered the garage, something shifted on his face. Not fear, not yet, but surprise, and for a man like Paxton, being surprised was more dangerous than being shot. No way. You were at the warehouse. Cale stepped forward. Each footfall rang on the concrete like a count. Barrett installed a backup sensor system in the estate last week. It's independent, offline, and no one knew except him and me. When the power got cut, the sensor triggered an emergency signal to my satellite phone. He stopped. I got that signal 15 miles out, and I drove back here in 9 minutes. Paxton calculated. Ray saw it in his eyes, the way he glanced left to count the men, glanced right to judge the distance to the exits, then looked at Ray standing between him and the van, and made his decision. Faster than Ray could react, his hand shot out, clamped around her wrist, yanked her back against him. A switchblade snapped open, steel flashing under the headlights, and the blade pressed to Ray's throat, so cold she thought she'd been cut before she even felt the pressure. Back up. Paxton's voice wasn't calm anymore. It was sharp and fast. Everyone back up, or she dies right here. Cale stopped. 3 meters. The distance between him and Ray was only 3 meters, but it might as well have been 3,000 miles. He couldn't rush in. He couldn't order anyone to shoot. He couldn't do anything he did every day. Use power, use force, use the fear he planted in other people to control every outcome, because the blade was at the throat of the one person he could not lose. Ray looked into Cale's eyes, and she saw what she never thought she'd see. Fear. Not fear of dying, fear of losing her. The man who controlled the entire West Coast was standing there, fists clenched, jaw locked, eyes red, and completely powerless. For the first time in his life, Cale Ashford couldn't do a thing. And Ray understood that if anyone had to end this, it would be her. Gus Peralta's voice rang in her head, clear as if he were standing right beside her in the bright kitchen that smelled like coffee and toast. Stomp the top of the foot, as hard as you can. The bones are thin. They'll break. A fraction of a second is enough. Ray drew in a breath. She poured everything into her right leg. All the fear, all the rage, all the love for the 2 children crying inside the van, and for the man standing in front of her with a broken heart in his eyes. She stomped down. Her heel crushed into the top of Paxton's foot with her full body weight. The crack sounded dry in the garage. Paxton screamed, his knee buckling, his knife hand loosening for a fraction of a second. And a fraction of a second was all Cale needed. He crossed the 3 meters so fast, no one in the garage saw him move. They only saw him standing there, then Paxton on the floor, and Cale driving him into the concrete with both hands, the knife skittering away, striking the van's wheel with a metallic clang. "Get the kids out," Cale roared, his voice breaking, not the order of a kingpin but the cry of a father. Ray ran to the van, yanked at the door, locked. She slammed her palm against the glass. Barrett appeared beside her and shoved an iron bar into her hands. Ray smashed the rear window, reached inside, unlocked the door from within, and pulled Milo out first, then June. Both children clung to her, crying, shaking, their tiny nails digging into her shoulders through her thin shirt. Ray sank to the garage floor with her back against a tire, wrapped her arms around them, and used her body to cover them again. Behind her, the sound of impacts on concrete. Fast. Short. Then it stopped. Silence. Ray didn't turn around. She didn't need to see. Footsteps came from in front of her. Ray looked up. Cale knelt in front of her. His hands scraped, his shirt torn further, breathing hard. But his eyes were only on her, only on her. He reached out, gathered all three of them into his arms, pulled them into his chest, his chin resting on the top of Ray's head. And he breathed, deep, slow, like a man who'd finally broken the surface after being under too long. "You're alive." His voice fractured. "You're alive. We're okay." Ray whispered into his chest, tears soaking into his black shirt. "We're okay.